What's up, guys, and welcome to the theScore eSports podcast. I am, of course, your host, Colin McNeil. In the studio with me today, we got behind the boards, Josh Burry.
Hello.
We got behind mic number 3, Dennis Gonzalez.
Hello.
Pretty hyped today, guys, because we have a guest. It's always good when we have a guest. Not just any guest, Jacob Toft-Andersen. Now, you may know him better as Maelk. Who is Maelk? Well, it depends on who you ask, really. He is currently the sporting director for North, winning CSGO team at the moment. But he has an incredible past in Dota, guys. He played that game for about a decade. He was a legend in the original Dota. Played Dota 2, obviously. He's been a manager in EG and a couple different organizations as well. So in terms of esports, he's really been around. And I don't know about you, but I have a litany of questions for this guy.
Well, that's actually why I'm really excited about this podcast, is like because he's had that experience from all three of these scenes. I'm really excited to hear about maybe some comparisons and stuff between them, because I'm like CS is like my first esports love in terms of playing it, but I'm not too key. I don't know a ton about Dota. I like League a lot, so I guess we'll see where the conversation takes us in the end.
That's just it. Like our guests are we often like to go very narrow, and I mean that in a positive way, like focus on one esport, even one aspect of one esport. But Maelk is in a unique position where he can speak to a few different things. Also, speaking of first esports love, fun fact, pretty sure he's a Jaedong fan, who is my favorite StarCraft player of all time. So, without further ado, why don't we just get him on?
Yeah, let's do that. So, Maelk, hello.
Hello.
Hey.
Welcome to the theScore eSports podcast. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. Before we get started with the hard-hitting questions here, I just was wondering if we know you've got a long history in esports, but right now you're the sporting director for North, and I was wondering if you could take us through just briefly what exactly that position is, what it entails, and what you do with North.
So right now it's a bit of everything, really. Imagine growing a sporting brand from the bottom up, or any esport brand for that matter. So we set out with a mission statement saying we wanted to compete and transcend organizations like Fnatic or Liquid. Those are the caliber teams that we are striving towards becoming bigger than those teams. That's not something we expect within the first year or the 3 years or 5 years even, but it's where we want to go. So the starting point was obviously getting a team and choosing a game of a certain relevance. And Counter-Strike, to me, is the title that has the most mainstream potential. I think it's the highest echelon of where esports can actually provide entertainment for the masses. It's easy to grasp. It's fun to follow. It's non-stop action. It has a lot of star power. It's an established game. It's also, I'm a Dota man, but essentially Counter-Strike is actually my first esports title. I played it competitively when I was from I was 14 till I was 16. Then I played Warcraft 3 competitively, and then I played Dota. So we started out with Counter-Strike, and we've now worked on it for 9 months. We're finally at I'd say in terms of results sports-wise, we're at a point that we are content with. We just took third place in the HLTV.org rankings, and we come off a second place at DreamHack Malmö and won DreamHack Montreal the week after. We qualified for the elite playoffs. So we're in a comfortable position, but we still need to, take that big title and continuously prove that we are not just a top 5 team, but a top 3 team, and preferably a top 1 team. And that's also one of the reasons for why we haven't entered other esports titles as of yet. The fact that we're building the organization and we want to build it right. We want to, make sure that the groundwork is there for teams to just easily come in to the organization. New players come in and immediately feel all the support that we want to give them. So we're at I'd say we're at the final stages of establishing the organization as a whole. So the Counter-Strike team and the academy team that we have has been sort of the the test dummies, if you will. But they're really good guys to work with, and I hope they enjoy working with us as much as we do them. And I think for the months and years to come, we'll add on additional titles to sort of solidify our position as a multi-game organization and not just Counter-Strike.
Wow, when you put it like that, 9 months, third on HLTV rankings, couple major titles, that's pretty impressive. I'm glad that you mentioned the interest in the other esports, because when North first announced its existence, you did a few interviews where you said that you were actually planning, that North was planning to get into League of Legends and Dota specifically. Is there any sort of timeline? Might we see a League of Legends next year or a Dota team or anything like that?
Well, technically, I actually said we weren't planning on going into League of Legends, but that Dota 2 was our focus point.
Okay.
One of the reasons for that is that at the time, I believe most of these interviews has been done when we just launched back in January.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, LCS wasn't what we'd regard as an interesting or even healthy environment to participate in, the game, from my perspective, at the time was sort of dying in terms of entertainment and viewership attention. And I wasn't sure that the model that Riot was using at the time was something we'd be interested in supporting. That teams had to live in Berlin, with us having our physical offices are here in Copenhagen, and this is where our teams live and practice as well. And that's not to say, Berlin is pretty close to Copenhagen, so we could have made that work. But I don't think the league structure as a whole wasn't something that we could put our name behind at the time. They've now announced that they're changing it. It's still not including the Nordics, but if you ask me right now whether we go into League of Legends or not, the answer will be no. But I'm not opposed to the fact that it could be down the road, assuming that Riot creates a healthy ecosystem that is worthwhile for teams to participate in. And right now, I'm on the edge of whether I believe that or not. I think it's very good for French, German, British and Spanish teams, but outside of that, I don't really see much potential for example, a team with a Nordic physicality to actually partake. And at the same time, yes, we're from the Nordics, so this is sort of you could call it an identity crisis. It's not for us, but we have our physical position here, but we're not opposed to the fact that we could take in teams from anywhere in the world, really. We want to establish ourselves as a global brand. So whether we have American players, Korean players, Chinese players, Danish players, German players, it doesn't really matter all that much. What's important is that we have championship-winning teams and players. Which leads me back to why we haven't, I said this earlier, we haven't entered other titles, much because we also haven't found the right teams and players available. Dota 2 especially being the second title that we have our eyes on, that we really want to enter, is hard to find teams that both live up to our standards and is also a good fit for us. Part of this is that in the competition in Counter-Strike is predominantly centered around Europe and to a certain degree North America as well, and they're by all means improving a lot as well. Whereas in Dota, at least half of it is centered around China and Southeast Asia. And while we do want to be global, I think it would be a stretch for us to immediately enter our second title with a Chinese team, for instance. That would require a very, very loyal relationship to people in China that we could build up around and could run our, Chinese physical offices. And we don't have that at present time. So that's simply why Dota 2 has been, quite the difficult obstacle to to enter, because the few Western teams there are available are very sought after, first of all, and secondly, me having a Dota background, I'm probably more picky than I should be, and as such, I keep seeing errors in players and teams, and I'm very, very skeptical about a lot of the team compositions and player choices. And to be very honest with you, I prefer building the team from scratch myself. So at some point, my board is going to tell me, please lower your standards. We want a Dota team. And until that happens, or my dream team comes along, I can't really, do much other than wait.
I just want to, I do want to talk actually more about your thoughts on what the problem is with Dota at the moment, or at least the teams and the players that you're seeing. But I want to go back and clarify something with you. You said that at the start of the year, the League of Legends, or at least the scene, was was dying. And do you feel that that's changed at all now, or do you still feel the same now as you did in January?
I think North American LCS is healthy. I think it's a great environment for the organizations that are in it. I think the European LCS is far and away, cost-wise, one of the most useless esports leagues at present time. I think there's very few teams that actually run a successful company based on the European LCS. Fnatic, G2, Unicorns of Love to some extent, because they've done an amazing job at branding themselves within the LCS community. I think they'd have a hard time becoming a multi-game organization. I also think they'd have a hard time if they, started losing core components of their roster and so forth. But outside of those organizations, even a team like H2K, who's been fairly, they've been in the top placements throughout the past seasons. Even those guys, I feel like, are probably struggling, and by their own admission, are struggling to find the business model around LCS.
That's
European
actually
LCS.
That's something that I wanted to ask about, Maelk. Is we saw H2K come out and say, we can't do this, we can't keep doing this. It's too much, and we've also seen European LCS numbers sort of falter in terms of viewership. It seems like a lot of people watch Fnatic, and to a lesser extent G2 in terms of viewership spikes. But we're not seeing, when it's Rock Hat Giants, if you want to go back to spring, it's unfortunately, that's just not a draw for many people. Could you already see this happening when you were working with Schalke? Was this something that you were well aware of during that time?
I mean, yes, very much so. I rebranded from Alliance to Elements. My hand was forced on this by Riot. And that rebranding in itself cost us a ton of fan support. And since then, a lot of different LCS teams have tried to assert themselves. Fnatic was in since the early days. I think Carlos with G2 has been the only one who's successfully created a roster that can actually created a fan base, much because of himself, right? He was a player trying to qualify with the squad for 2 seasons. He was adamant about continuing in League of Legends, and when he finally succeeded, he also built up one of the most championship-winning rosters that the European LCS had ever seen. So outside of those 2 teams, I don't really think it's evidently not easy for the teams to neither create a fan base or create any viewer retention that would justify them even participating in the league. Outside of Riot's payment, I doubt any of those teams have income sources, and that's hugely problematic. So when I got the offer from Schalke to sell my spot, I jumped on it. I jumped on it immediately because I was at the time. There's a whole background story to that, but let's just say I was very happy with shutting down Elements and getting rid of the spot. And I think a lot of team owners a lot of the people who's invested into the European LCS probably has that same feeling right now. Depending, I don't know the details of what they've been offered from Riot in terms of the new structure and the new markets, and maybe it's great. I foresee some of those teams to be hugely successful in their respective markets, but I still think 2/3 of each of those, of the German and the French and the Spanish and the British market, are gonna be dead in the water from the get-go.
Well, I really want to ask you, because when I saw the announcement, or I guess there hasn't been technically an official announcement, but when I saw the report about what was going to happen with the EU LCS, I was a bit confused because, yes, there are some teams from the indicated cities and countries that certainly could rep those, but I was so surprised that there was no Scandinavian representation in any way.
Mm-hmm. We've Scandinavia is, as much Counter-Strike country, it's also League of Legends country. Dota 2 never really struck a chord with the Scandinavian audience because of League of Legends. We've grown some of the best talent that the world has ever seen in League of Legends, Denmark and Sweden especially. And so for Riot to do that was, from a Nordic perspective, definitely disappointing. From an objective standpoint, definitely makes sense. What they basically do is mimic European football and say, what are the biggest markets population-wise? What are the biggest markets in terms of football? Okay, copy that one-to-one. The same way North America is copying the franchise model and everything. And it's a winning recipe, so they didn't really need to change it. They could just copy whatever seemed to work in regular sports. I don't blame them for that, but it is disappointing if you're me and you sit as a Dane and you look around, and I'm sure there's a lot of Scandinavian people who, like me, are disappointed. And also, it sort of hinders the talent growth in League of Legends from the Scandics, because are German teams going to look for Scandinavians, or are they going to look for homegrown Germans? They're probably going to go for the latter, because that's what you build fan base on in a German market. Same with France, same with Spain especially. I think the British market is going to be the one where it's mostly international, simply because Britain doesn't have that much talent, and it's an English-speaking country, so they can, justify why nationality doesn't matter all that much.
I'm kind of glad to hear you say that, Maelk, because I just, when I think of, I am an EU LCS fan. I guess there's a few of us left at least, and when I think of EU LCS, you have to think of Denmark. How could you not think of Denmark, right? This is a country that has produced the finest players that the EU LCS has ever seen, in many cases, at almost any position. I mean, the mid is kind of oh yes, Danish mid. Yeah. But still, I mean, it was mind-blowing to me that there was seemingly no consideration. Again, this is just a report, so who knows if there's long-term plans? I don't know, but to me, I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, it's craziness. But
I think unless the British market really takes off in terms of international players and can justify why Scandinavians should continue playing and pursuing their dreams of becoming a professional player, I think we'll see much less talent coming out from the Scandics, and I don't think any North American organizations are going to take their chances with new players who's not yet proven within the European LCS.
Okay, I think we've talked a lot enough, let's say, about League of Legends. Let's talk about let's talk about a real game. Let's talk about a real game.
I hogged the mic
Dota.
there
for a bit.
It's gonna be Dota.
Okay,
so,
all right.
Bringing it back to Dota, you mentioned some of the difficulties about maybe finding the right team for North. I think mostly you were kind of talking about from the talent perspective, or perhaps a chemistry perspective, but I wanted to get your opinion on the kind of business side of diving into Dota and the Dota scene. Speaking of League of Legends and CSGO, I think it's a very much so a different environment that you're getting into, and I think a lot of organizations kind of make mistakes when they kind of come into it. Mistakes maybe not necessarily of their own doing, just kind of maybe reactions from the community. Let's say Cloud9, Mouse Sports to fire some shots there, I guess. But what's your approach, not just from the talent perspective, but the business perspective of North going into Dota?
one of the things that's important to us, and which we did with Counter-Strike, and we're going to enforce throughout whichever game we enter and whichever players we sign, is longevity. Because if we don't have our players, we will immediately lose our fans as well. That's why our Counter-Strike players are on 3-year contracts. I wanted our Dota players to be the same. A lot of the Dota players were laughing at it when I were in talks with them. They were like, that's impossible. You know,
Yeah.
we can't sign for, at best, until August next year.
Yeah.
You know, obviously because of the international. But that's because they're so stubborn. You know, that's what they're used to. So why change that? And if no other team does that, they don't want to be bound down to one team. And I get that. You know, I'm in talks with other of the organizations who are also looking to, or already have entered Dota, in how we need to restructure that entire space. I think there needs to come a framework probably made by the teams themselves, you know, not the players, but the organizations, in which everyone agrees that this is how we do it for the future. You know, we do these 2, 3, whatever year contracts. We have an established transfer market, and not just, you know, the player saying, "Oh, I don't like playing with you anymore. I'm going to go over to Envy." I think until that happens, it's very hard for teams to justify investing into Dota. I think it's one of the reasons for why you see brands like Cloud9 and Mouse enter for 2 months and then they're out again. You know, they go in for the international, for all the exposure that one event gives them, and then they're out again. You know, they're not. I don't blame them, but at the same time, they're not. You know, they're not. Their heart is not in the game. You know, you can't say this. Luckily, Mousesports have stuck with the Greek roster despite their result faltering. But even then, you know, if you look at, I guess, when they've tried and tried and tried so many times, you could argue, oh, maybe their heart is in it. I still don't believe it is, because they only seem to try up at the international. And I want to see something else. You know, okay, Cloud9 had 1 year, and it's better than most other organizations. But it's simply because of how the structure is in Dota right now and how the player's mindset is. And at the same time, Dota is a very closed circuit in the sense that Counter-Strike is, as I said earlier, it's very easy to digest. It's easy to watch. It's easy to understand because it's close to a certain reality. Whereas Dota is very hard to get into. It's very hard to understand, and you won't find it amusing to watch unless you've played it. And that creates difficulties with sponsors. I think from a sponsor perspective, it's mostly endemic sponsorships that we can get. You know, peripheral brands, energy drinks. These sort of sponsorships, whereas it's much harder to go out and justify it for a car manufacturer or an airline or whatever, you know. And that's one concern. The other is something as simple as prize money distribution. If you look at any sport in the world that is team-based, prize money always goes to the teams and organizations, and then they'll pay salaries and bonuses. It's in esports as a whole. It's always a lot of people talk about the 90-10 share, and that's for the most part true. In Dota, it's oftentimes even less because of how money heavy TI especially is. That creates another problem, especially now that TI gets so much attention, and the organizations, especially the North American ones, gets investment. They get venture capitalism, and that raises the salary by quite a lot, and that makes it even more difficult to justify the business model of Dota. So it's, you know, I think even if you look at a team like for instance Mousesports again, they had a meteoric rise at some point, then they fell off. They're not in a market that is particularly interesting for most sponsors because they're Greek, and even though they're considered a good team, maybe, you know, they're not one of the best teams, but they're by all means considered, you know, tier 2, right on the verge of tier 1. There's almost zero fan base around them. There's zero attention around them, which is why Dota is so difficult in comparison to Counter-Strike. Because in Counter-Strike, there's 20 teams that can all justify their existence through their fan bases. In Dota, I think there's 5. in the West, and then there's another 5 in China, and there's 5 in Southeast Asia. So unless you have, as a Western organization, the willingness to enter with an Asian lineup, it's really, really difficult for you to justify getting a team if it isn't championship winning.
Actually, I wanted to touch on more of the, I guess, as you put it, actually, the business of Dota. We've mentioned franchising in League of Legends, but in Dota, there's a new system with the point system and the introduction of the minors and majors, which instead of making it just, I mean, it's still a focus, the international, but now it's a pro circuit. Everything, the minors and the majors leads up to directly.
You have to compete throughout the year. And not just at the qualifier, like you have to be out there playing tournaments.
Exactly, right? Exactly.
Yeah, but, I mean, and the schedule is almost as insane as a baseball schedule, right? It's almost playing every day for 8 months straight. At first, when I saw it, at first glance, on the surface, this was a dream come true. Oh, that's great. Amazing. We've been asking this for a long time, but then once you think about it, it sort of, first of all, it dilutes the product. There's so many games going on. Who's playing where? Which tournament is actually important to follow? Oh, this is a major, but this is also a major. Oh, last week was a major. Oh, there's another major in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And that takes away from it, but it also lowers the production quality of the tournament, something that's already been brought up a lot on Twitter as well. The fact that it's 5 or 6 different organizers, if that, I think it's even more. And even from the most premier, most established organizers, they're already struggling with putting out a product that I think we can all be proud of. I rarely see a product in eSport that we can all be proud of. And now we suddenly have so many different people competing about it. But they're not really competing because they're all allowed to do it,
Yeah.
So the only thing they're competing over is the viewership and the teams. But the teams will automatically play in it, and with the teams comes the viewership. And so you can put on a shit tournament. By all means, it could be a bad product for the viewers at home. It can have little to no physical crowd. It can basically go completely unnoticed as well. And I think that's a problem.
Right.
But
from your perspective, from a team owner, or at least like from the high end or from the upper echelon of a team,
the management end.
Management. Sorry, that's what I meant to say. Like going into that system, is that worrisome for you, like maybe owning a Dota team now as opposed to the previous system, or like do you see somehow more money or more advertisement coming into the scene because of the new system?
I mean, it's not worrisome because everything is what you make your expectations to, right? So I just have to put my expectations accordingly so that I know what my worst case scenario is if I enter. And with Dota, my biggest worry in any title, or not even any title, I think my biggest worry in Valve titles is Valve themselves. You never know what to expect, right? From one day to the next, they could technically change the tournament structure. They could change the rule set. They could just not make the game allowed to be played anymore. They could withdraw all funding. They could do any number of things. They could also sell their company, and suddenly someone else takes over. You never know. And that is one of the biggest issues I think eSport has. It's the fact that everything lies with the game publisher, and it's no one owns the rights for football. You could say FIFA and UEFA owns the rights for professional football, but yeah, they probably do. But that doesn't take away the fact that football will remain where it is for the next 50 years. Nothing as monumental as whatever Valve can pretty much do as they please from one day to the next can happen in football. But any number of things can happen in eSport. And no one will know about it until it happens. And I think that more than anything is problematic. That is my actual worry with Dota and with Counter-Strike. Add to that the game might also just die out. You know, the user base might lose interest. A new game might come from a publisher that is taking away user base and viewership. PlayerUnknown's Battleground is taking away players from every game worldwide, and that can also just happen. That's with a few months just, and it's very hard to build a business on that unless you exhibit the flexibility and have a dynamic approach to what esport is, and at the same time, build your organization with competent people that have foresight enough to realize which titles are important to be in outside of just scouting the right talent. So there's a lot of these little things that goes into whether you invest in a title or not. For Dota, I think right now it's definitely interesting because regardless of how poor the product is from some of these tournaments, and this is before the tournament's been put on, right? So I'm actually just judging ahead of time, which is, you could say it is unfair, but considering esports track record, I don't think it is.
Yeah, you're just looking at past history for these tournaments and sort of projecting forward, right? So
exactly. So even if they put on bad products, I think as long as the viewership and the attention is there, it doesn't matter all too much. One thing so if I have to worry as well, based on not the metrics that Valve can do, but if I have to worry about something, it's that maybe the attention of Dota 2 is inflated through or around the international, and rest of the year it's not really that interesting. Whereas in Counter-Strike, I think there's attention throughout the year, both at leagues but also the tournaments every month. I fear that Dota has less of that already and will have even less now that there's 20 tournaments ongoing at the same time.
Well, if I'm an esports organization owner right now, you're painting a bit of a frightening picture when it comes to Dota. And last week we saw Immortals jump right in. I wonder if you were sitting across the table from Noah Winston, what advice you might give him entering this scene.
Noah and I discussed this a lot, actually. I was one of the... I wouldn't say I was one of the ones helping him with Immortals, or with the MVP, or whatever you want to call them, Phoenix. But he and I talked a lot about Dota, again, because it's very important for teams or organizations such as ours to have this outside framework built around Dota so that we don't lose our investment from one day to the next, or whenever TI is over, or if we fail to qualify for TI. And at the same time also be able to sort of not dictate, but at least push the game in the right direction from an organization point of view. Because if there's no organizations, there's no fan bases, and if there's no fan bases, there's no viewership. So I think it's very important that all the different orgs are catered to as well. You see these player-made teams. I think very few of them has had success in the long term. I think Alliance is one, but even then, what's going on with Alliance right now? EG is not, it's player-owned now, sure, but they built up a huge brand and were basically given this golden nugget to them. So I wouldn't regard them as a player-built brand. You saw Envy leaving NP less than a year after it was created. Secret is another one. I'm sort of skeptical about whether Secret will actually last. What happens when Poppy quits playing? Will he continue the brand? Who knows? So I think the teams are very essential. The organizations, the established organizations with established fan bases in which they can draw people not just from Dota, but their Counter-Strike fans can also be fans of their Dota team. I think those are important to have in the Dota space, especially if you want to fill up stadiums around the world and if you want enough viewership and such. Noah got one of the teams, Immortals got one of the teams that were somewhat sought after. They're a good team by all means. They have a proven track record in which they can obtain top placements. They even won a tournament. They have, despite, and I don't mean this in any negative or racist way or anything, but from a Western perspective, despite the fact that they're from Korea, they have very marketable personalities, and as such, and because they were free agents, I think they were one of the best pickups. But even then, you know, there's not a lot of those guys hanging around, right? The other one is the Team Dire, and I think that's it. Every other team is spoken for, right? And in a transfer window, if there's only 2 available Western teams, and the next one is Tier 2, Tier 3 teams, with all due respect to the various different lineups that's also been created, you know, I'm a huge fan and friend of Synderen, but I don't necessarily think his lineup is one that will join a premier organization.
I was gonna ask Maelk when you said there that Dire was the only one left. I was like, what about No Diggity? Come on.
But I mean, there's definitely potential, and I'm, you know, for their sake, I hope I'm wrong, right? And I hope they're super successful, because they're good guys and I want them to be. But from a business standpoint, it's way too big of a risk to run. And from my own in North, they weren't even on our radar. So, and again, that's probably because I'm super skeptical. But I haven't heard of any premier organizations giving them offers either. So, you know, North is not the only ones. I'm just the one being very outspoken about it.
Fair. Taking it back to North and CS in particular, I believe it was at the beginning of August, it was announced that you guys were joining WESA, or as I'm told, WESA to pronounce it
yes.
nowadays. I always said WESA.
Overnight, it seemed like everybody I spoke with started saying WESA. So I truly do believe there was a memo that got circulated that was like, we are not Jar Jar Binks. I have no inside information about this. I don't know.
It's the American pronunciation that we all had to adopt, apparently. That's how I was told that it was named WESA and not WESA.
I'm taking that as memo confirmed, Maelk, just so you know. I sounds like there was an official memo of some kind, so... Sorry, anyways, I think I destroyed your question.
No, that's okay. I opened the door with the WESA thing. I was just wondering, Maelk, if you could speak a little bit to the point of why North signed on with WESA and what exactly they represent in regards to the future of organized Counter-Strike.
Well, so it all trails back to you know what I said about Dota as well, and esports as a whole. It's that esports it's still in this Wild West stage where everything is just gunslingers, and you know there's no laws in place and everything's possible, but at the same time nothing is possible just because there's no established governing body and there's no framework for how things are supposed to be. And I think I know we joined because we wanted to influence that. Obviously, half of my investor group is from a football world. They have ways of doing it that can definitely carry over into esport. I'm not saying that we should take the football model and put it down one-to-one on esport. I think that would be a huge mistake. Luckily, the football part of my company agrees with that for now. But at the same time, they also, you know, they have years of experience on how to build a professional, sustainable business around a sport model or a performance group, if you will. And that's one of the things that is very important for us to influence as fast as possible. And at present time, WESA is that body because that's where the other premier teams are at, and that's where if you will, the big decisions are made. So, in that regard, it's very, you know, it's no secret for why we joined it, and I'm hoping that we can make a difference and with the other teams create a healthy, sustainable environment for everyone and not just the players. Because at present time in esport, the only people making money are the players.
That's really an interesting response for me because it sounds like, and some other conversations I've had with like FaZe Clan, for example. It sounds like WESA, I'm going to call it WESA now. I got your memo, guys. It sounds like WESA has finally got to that point where it's like not just like a wait and see, it seems like most organizations are like, okay, this thing is going to last. So we need to be in that conversation. We have to be at the table. Otherwise, we're just opting out of an opportunity here to build the future of competitive Counter-Strike. Would it be fair to say that that's sort of how North feels about it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's, I don't think we want to limit it to Counter-Strike, but at present time, that's obviously the priority. And at the same time, we can't do anything about neither Overwatch nor League of Legends, because those are two closed circuit eSport titles where the publisher sits with all the power. So essentially what WESA can do right now is they can only do it for Valve titles and for new titles from different publishers that aren't necessarily creating closed circuit environments.
Right.
At the same time, I also think there was a lot of controversy around WESA when it was first created, and I definitely still see some of that criticism being applicable to WESA because of ESL's involvement. I think for eSport to really succeed, I think there needs to be not one governing body. I think there needs to be 5 governing bodies, or 6 or 7. I think first of all the players need their own association. Then the teams need their own association, and WESA is not the team's association, and that's the problem right now. Because as long as ESL is involved with WESA and there's players on the board as well, it's not a team-only association. It's not necessarily a bad thing. WESA can exist, but all the other associations need to exist as well. There needs to be a tournament association, or created for, let's take Counter-Strike as an example. There needs to be a circuit where there's only 1, 2, or 3 tournaments, and then those guys, have their own association. I think it's unreasonable to expect 5, 6, 7 different tournament organizers to live unless we create, unless we mimic Formula 1/tennis. And I'm not sure that's the best model to take. Some people are. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just not convinced. And I think maybe eSports should create its very own model that is a mix of different, sport models. So you can take some from tennis, you can take some from football, and so forth. But back to the point, I still think a lot of different associations are needed, and to create this sort of checks and balances system in which not one single association, such as WESA right now, is controlling everything that happens.
Okay, so as we enter sort of the dying minutes of the show here.
Dying minutes.
That's a little dramatic.
I'm gonna try and clutch out the podcast.
Yeah.
Do you have a kit? Do you have a diffuse kit?
Well, it's a 1v3 with Maelk on us, right?
Okay,
so,
I'm so dead then.
I'm gonna blow this podcast up. But I wanted to actually, these Counter-Strike metaphors are inappropriate, because I wanted to go dive a little bit into Dota history, actually. And talk a little bit, Maelk, about something called the Maelk Award. Now, I am
ending on a high.
Well, we
didn't want you to hang up first, right?
Yeah. When I heard this was a possibility, I was like, well, we got to ask that last, right? Like we can't leave with that.
We can't open it with it. Yeah.
I'm with Josh in the regard that I'm not a Dota historian. No. It's not my forte. But the way it's been explained to me is basically you were playing for EG against Mouse Sports in a joint Dota tournament, and there was a game where you were on Venomancer, you died 20 times, 0 kills. I'm really sorry. I actually feel so bad as this goes on. And this meme arose.
Well, I think you missed the core point of that game. The core point was that the fact that we won this fight.
Yes. You're right. That is the key. You're right. So you had this bizarre stat line, and you won the game.
So do you want me to explain what happened, or what is the?
I would love for you to explain what happened.
So essentially, we're playing this meme team from Mouse Sports. They have all these dumbasses on their roster. They have Sing Sing, I think. They have Trixie. They have all these morons who don't know how to win in Dota. They know how to have fun though, and I respect that, because gaming is ultimately about having fun first and foremost. So essentially, my first 10 deaths were probably, some of them should have been avoided by me. Some of them was just good play by them. When we go into the later stages of the game, by all means, we should have lost. They had a full inventory Morphling, full inventory. I think it was I don't know. But they were decked out on all their heroes, and they by all means should have won with the lineup they had. What they did though is that they kept in the late game. They realized, oh, this guy has so many deaths. Let's just see how many we can keep on adding on to that. I think at some point in the game, some of them would write XD and sit and talk about how funny this was. So they would run past my 4 teammates into a Venomancer. They'd eat all the damage and spells from my teammates just to try and get me. I'd always get my ultimate off. Sadly, Venomancer ultimate doesn't kill, and I wouldn't get any of those kills. So they'd kill me, and then they would all die to my team because of how poorly they initiated, which ultimately ended up in us winning the game. So it's fun, it's great. They had their fun. We won the game. Everyone wins. The meme was created. The community wins. And it also teaches you the magic of Dota, that even though one guy seems to be feeding a ton, it's a team effort to win the games. And even if you should have been winning the game, you can lose it by making the wrong decision.
So it sounds like maybe you're not too banged up about it, Maelk. Like you kind of were like, well, they made a meme, I won the game, so everybody wins except them.
I've had 5 or 6 years. I don't know when the game was, but I've had a decent amount of years to sort of get used to it. I think I very rarely meet people for the first time without them remembering that particular game. So I'm very used to the fact that people bring it up. I've also not hosted, but I've been on the desk in so many tournaments where my co-analysts keep bringing it up and finding it amusing. When Paul was new to Dota 2, he also used it as a cornerstone of his mockery. I've had to grow some hard skin whenever that was brought up.
Well, I mean, I'm happy that you don't seem to hold it against us that we brought it up. That's.
I think that particular game is just very descriptive of Dota, I think.
Like it has a lot of the core themes of Dota. Like
I like that you can extract those lessons from it. And listen, Maelk, I was telling these guys, this guy's a grown man. He's a sporting director for North. He's not going to mind if we talk about some memes at the end of the show.
Good stuff.
With that said, we are burning time. We know you're a busy guy and you got to get back to winning some more championships over at North, I think.
Hopefully.
Well, we hope to see more great play for the boys Cage and B and Config and all those guys. Josh, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to ask Maelk, is there anything else that you maybe want to talk about before we let you go? Anything else you wanted to add? I think we covered a lot of ground. We hit the big 3. We hit esports history. So, I mean, we covered a lot of ground.
I think I'll leave the viewers with one last reminder, or I'd like for people for those who haven't tried esports events yet. I despite the fact that I said they were poorly produced earlier, it's still an experience. It's great experiencing the crowds together. It's great seeing your favorite teams and players in person, and I'm always, especially at the very big tournaments, I'm always dumbstruck and amazed by how great of a feeling you're left with when you suddenly hear the crowd roar and everything. It's I get the same feeling from when I watch the football games and such, but even more so with esport. Maybe because esport is my passion, football isn't. But also the crowds seem to somehow be more into it than people are into football, or basketball or whatever other sporting events you've been at. So I think for everyone who's not tried an esport event yet, I think they're missing out, and I think they should definitely go, even if it means traveling for it.
I agree with you, Maelk. I've been in quite a few crowds, and the crowd, it's weird, but there's like almost a sort of like, we're all here to watch the game and we all love the game. But there's also the, like, if you don't know the game yet and you want to ask somebody about it, everybody's like willing to talk about it, which I think is really interesting. Like I've never met like a really unhelpful person at an esports event who wasn't really drunk. You have met those people. There's a couple times I've seen it, but most of the time someone's like, why did they do that? Why did they pick that? Or like, what's the play here? Anybody seems to be willing to sort of chip in and be like, oh, they're trying to save the weapon, or like, this guy's really good on this map or whatever. So I agree with you. I mean, if you haven't been out to an event, definitely check it out. And there's like, you might be surprised. There's probably some stuff close to you if you really look. It might not be the biggest thing ever. You know, it might not be a Dota 2 major, CSGO major, but I'm sure the crowd's probably almost as hype.
Yeah,
nearly as hype.
For sure.
All right, so
well, with that, Maelk, I'll try again, and I'll say thank you so much for lending your time to the Score Esports podcast. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope we can have you on again soon sometime.
Definitely.
Great. Thanks a lot, Maelk.
All right, thank you.
Well, we could have a whole podcast
Wow.
about esports
Yeah,
events. Honestly,
oh my God, yeah.
It's such a weird thing.
Yeah, there's like a weird energy. To your point about
super
like
weird.
games that like people don't know, like when I was in Katowice like however long ago, people were in there because like they wanted to get seats early for the CSGO tournament. But first was the StarCraft tournament, and it was actually like, it was packed, and people were like, I don't know what's going on, but I love this. This is fucking awesome.
Yeah, there's a game you need to play to love, I think, speaking of.
Yeah.
Well, I really like that too. I really like that viewpoint. If you've ever been to BlizzCon, the stages are all shared. So if you're there to watch Heroes of the Storm, but like WoW runs late, you know, you go there and you see the other game being played, and you can ask anybody about the game. And I really love that, actually. And I think with other events too, you know, even if it's like a dream hack, for example, the stages are usually close enough together you can even hear what's happening at another stage.
Yeah.
So everything is sort of accessible in that way, and I love that. I think that's really cool. And communities are at their best when they're like welcoming to people who aren't, you know.
Yeah.
It's kind of easy to get insular and get elitist, but I mean, at the end of the day, we're all just trying to enjoy esports. So.
Yeah, and again, to your point, like I think Colin, you can attest to this, but the size of the venue doesn't necessarily matter, which is usually the case for Street Fighter or FGC. Like, people will be playing in a parking lot and it'll still be hype.
Oh yeah, don't even get me started on the fighting game hype, man. The energy that brings is, like you said, parking lot or hockey stadium, either one, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Wow, Josh, before we go, I want to say you're really absorbing the energy of the person who used to sit in that chair, Ryan Stratton. You're just so positive, and everything is great, and
I mean,
you're going to fall in love with every guest now.
Everybody knows that I'm like actually a big pessimist in real life. So I'm trying to really channel Ryan. He's still alive, so maybe
he is actually alive.
You're doing opposite
to my
Josh.
knowledge.
I mean, he might be dead.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard from him recently. Actually, if you're watching this, Ryan, text me immediately. But I think like at the end, like it is just crazy to be so divisive when it comes to esports. Like maybe my esport. Shout out to Heroes of the Storm. Maybe my esport's not as big as yours, but I can guarantee you there are people who love it just as much. So why the hate? You know, that's all I'm saying. Why the hate?
Because haters gonna hate.
Yeah. Can I say something? I forgot to ask.
Show's over. See you later. Yes, of course.
I forgot to ask about Adidas.
I know. I have in my notes.
Yeah.
I have. Okay, so I have these long.
When you give the 10-minute warning, I'm like,
I have these long questions written out, and then one just says Dennis Adidas stuff. Because as you told me months ago, North Copenhagen FC, they have a big deal wrapped up with Adidas, right?
Yes, I think so. The thing is, like, I don't think they've actually, like, as far as North and Adidas, haven't done anything with that sponsorship. But with North looking to pick up a Dota team, Maelk, this one's a free one for you. If you want to get Arteezy, in the contract is he gets the new releases of the Yeezys every time.
Oh, he's a big shoe guy?
Oh, yeah.
Could we ever see some Arteezys? Is that a possibility?
why can't I get the new config Adidas sneaker? You know, like I'm about it. I want that.
For sure. Yeah. We
The
need
colors
the collabs.
even work. It's the same colors.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, get us the collabs. That is all the time we have for the Score Esports podcast today. I have been Colin McNeil for Josh Bury.
Hello.
This is the end of the show. For Dennis Gonzalez.
Hey guys, it's good to see you. Hey, how's it going?
Wow, way to make it awkward.
All right, this is hella awkward, but don't forget, we do this every week. Check us out. We're on YouTube. We're on your favorite podcast provider, including iTunes, obviously. Score Esports app. Download it. Follow it. We're up in that all day. If there's a guest that you want us to get, if we got a guest you like and you wanted to ask him something, hit us up on Twitter.
I love guest suggestions. Give me guest suggestions or memes.
Yeah, we'll do our best.
Or memes. Tweet me some memes.
Or memes. Yeah, with that said, GG. Oh, there's Josh Furry. Maelk was all of us, I think, at one time.
All of us? Oh yeah.
That was my bad, guys.
Yeah.
I'm new. I've almost got it. I swear to God. I swear to God, I almost have it.
I was doing the Ryan Stratton special of like the trail off ending, you know, like.